You know the exact physical sensation. Someone looks at you, says the word no, and your stomach instantly drops. The standard response involves talking it out or seeking closure. But there is a tactical alternative, a method designed to isolate the social stimulus from the emotional reaction. The error begins in the first few milliseconds. When we face rejection, our instinct is to take the event personally and absorb the external feedback into our core identity. You silently tell yourself, "I am hurt." By using those words, you wire a temporary external event into your permanent sense of self, which often leads to a persistent victim mindset. To break this cycle, you can replace emotional processing with a data-driven psychological framework by learning to view yourself from an external perspective. From this perspective, emotional devastation isn't a requirement of rejection. It's a specific cognitive outcome that can be modified through deliberate mental shifts. This shift begins with the third-person glitch, a technique used to create immediate psychological distance between the self and the event. The next time you are rejected, imagine you are watching a character on a screen. Instead of using the pronoun I, use your actual name. For example, tell yourself, "Rahul is experiencing a negative social response." This linguistic change alters brain activity. Speaking in the third person suppresses the amygdala's emotional response and activates the logical prefrontal cortex. You transition to a passive observer. Your focus shifts from feeling the event to documenting its data points. This leads to the second mechanism, semantic reframing. This relies on the fact that the specific words we use are the raw materials the brain uses to manufacture our feelings. Telling yourself, "I was betrayed," or "my heart is broken," triggers a physiological response that manifests as physical heaviness or pain. You can neutralize this by using clinical language. Instead of saying, "I failed," say, "My attempt was unsuccessful." Instead of "I was lied to," say, "I made an incorrect calculation about this person's reliability." When you remove the dramatic vocabulary, you deprive the brain of the labels it needs to categorize the experience as a catastrophe. Since our internal vocabulary dictates our neurological response, changing these labels directly influences the intensity of the emotional outcome. Once you manage your internal dialogue, you can process any remaining sting by treating the rejection purely as data for future use. Think of this discomfort like a check engine light. You don't take the light personally, you simply recognize it as a signal that a specific system needs attention. Rejection is a neutral indicator. It suggests that your communication strategy, your timing, or your current level of preparation may need to be adjusted. This objectivity reveals that the pain usually comes from the friction between a fantasy expectation and the reality of the situation. You can remove this friction by adopting a zero expectation policy. This is similar to a sniper focusing entirely on mechanics, knowing once the bullet fires, the outcome is out of their hands. This detachment allows you to view relationships through the lens of return on investment. Though framed as unconditional, they function as transactions of energy and value. If a connection provides a negative return, the logical step is cutting the attachment. Evaluating people based on their actual output, rather than a romanticized ideal, makes it easier to remove yourself from draining situations. This shift requires replacing the hope for specific outcomes with a focus on observable reality and calculated decisions. By combining these layers, observing from the third person, sanitizing your vocabulary, and operating with zero expectations, you build a new architecture for how you handle social feedback. In this state, rejections lack the impact required to disrupt your internal stability. They become signals rather than injuries. This strategy trades common emotional vulnerability for a higher degree of self-governance. You stop being a victim of external opinions and start being the director of your own state. If you are ready to apply these data-driven shifts to your own life, acknowledge the transition in the comments by writing, "I am the observer." Rejection is no longer a source of pain. It is simply another data point used for your continuous optimization.